I want you to visualize a moment. You're in a meeting. Maybe it's a performance review. Maybe it's a sales pitch. The tension is palpable. The other person is talking and they're unhappy. What is happening in your brain right now? If you're like 90% of the business professionals, your brain is in defense mode. You're analyzing their words for weakness. You're formulating your comeback. You're waiting for that last split second of silence, that tiny gap in the audio waveform, so you can jump in and win.
The Mindset Manual with Myron Williams.
Welcome back to the Mindset Manual. I'm your host, Myron Williams. If you've been with us for the first 2 episodes, you know what we do here. We dismantle the chaos of modern life to find the mechanics of peace. Usually, we talk about the internal world, your spirit, your mental state, your personal relationships. But today, we're shifting gears. We're taking the show on the road. Specifically, we're taking it into the boardroom, the open plan office, the construction site, and the Zoom call. We're going to talk about the arena where we spend the vast majority of our waking hours, our work. How does peace translate to high-stakes negotiation? How does balance survive when you're trying to launch a startup? How do you maintain mindfulness when your Q3 projections are down and your investors are screaming? In the business world, we're obsessed with the hard skills. We obsess over the coding languages, the marketing funnels, the financial modeling, the supply chain logistics. We look at resumes and check for certifications. And don't get me wrong, you need those. You cannot build a skyscraper without steel and concrete. But what's the mortar? What's the glue? What's the invincible force that keeps the engine running when the oil pressure drops and the heat gauges are in red? It's not your ability to use Excel. It's your ability to read the room. Today, we're breaking down emotional intelligence. We're going to talk about the power of listening to understand, not just to reload your argument. We'll unpack the paradox of leading by following. We're going to discuss the lie of hustle culture and why your personal life is actually your biggest business asset. And finally, we'll cover how to control your emotions when the stakes are highest. But before we pop the hood on your internal engine, let's talk about the engine of your actual business operations. I want you to visualize a moment. You're in a meeting. Maybe it's a performance review. Maybe it's a sales pitch. The tension is palpable. The other person is talking and they're unhappy. What is happening in your brain right now? If you're like 90% of the business professionals, your brain is in defense mode. You're analyzing their words for weakness. You're formulating your comeback. You're waiting for that last split second of silence, that tiny gap in the audio waveform, so you can jump in and win. We treat conversation like a tennis match. We're just standing at the baseline, racket back, waiting to smack the ball back as hard as we can. That's not listening. That is stalling. That is waiting for your turn to speak. We are trained to be the smartest person in the room. We think leadership looks like having the answer immediately. We think silence is weakness. But I'm telling you, the most dangerous person in the room is the one who is silent, observing and actually processing. You have to kill the ego that says, I need to prove I know the answer right now. When someone is speaking, whether it's a customer with a complaint or a partner with a new idea, you need to listen to the intent behind the words. Let's look at a real-world example. A client calls you up angry. They're yelling about a 5% increase on their contract. They're saying, this is unacceptable. Your service isn't worth this. I can go to your competitor. If you listen to reply, you're going to argue the value. You're going to pull out a spreadsheet showing inflation prices. You're going to get defensive and you might win the argument, but you lose the client. But if you listen to understand, you might hear something else. You might ask yourself, what are they actually afraid of? Maybe the client just had their budget slashed by their CFO. Maybe they're terrified of looking incompetent to their boss because costs are spiraling. They aren't mad at you. They're scared of themselves. If you understand that fear, the conversation changes. You stop arguing the price and start solving their problem. You say, I hear that the budget is tight. Let's look at the payment terms. Let's look at how we can help you justify this ROI to your board. Suddenly, you aren't the enemy. You're the ally. If you listen to understand, you build trust instantly. People know when they're being heard. It's a physical sensation. And in business, trust is the currency that matters the most. This leads us directly into the second pillar. And this one makes the alpha types uncomfortable. It's compassion. Compassion. Now, I know what some of the sharks out there are thinking. Compassion? Myron, this is business. It's a dog-eat-dog world. Compassion is soft. Compassion is weak. Let me correct you. Compassion is strategic. Compassion doesn't mean you let people walk all over you. It doesn't mean you keep employees that are incompetent. It doesn't mean you give away your product for free. Business is still a meritocracy. The numbers have to add up. But compassion means you understand the human element behind the performance. Picture this. You have a top performer. Let's call him James. James is a rock star. Always on time, always hits his quota, closes the biggest deals. But suddenly, over 2 weeks, James falls off the cliff. He's missing deadlines. He's irritable in meetings. His paperwork is sloppy. A leader with low emotional intelligence, the boss mindset, reacts with force. They pull James into the office and say, get it together or you're done. I don't pay you to go slack off. They manage by fear. What happens? James, who is already struggling, disengages. He starts looking for another job. You lose your top performer. A leader with high emotional intelligence notices the pattern and asks a different question. They ask, James, this isn't like you. What's going on? Maybe James is sick. Maybe James has a sick parent he's caring for. Maybe he's going through a messy divorce. Maybe he's just burnt out because he's carrying the team for 6 months. If you show compassion in that moment, if you act like a human being first and a boss second, you create something money cannot buy: loyalty. If you say, take Friday off, handle your business, we got you. James comes back on Monday, ready to run through a brick wall for you. I've seen massive deals saved because of, instead of getting angry at a vendor for a shipping delay, the business owner showed compassion to the vendor's situation. Then that vendor worked twice as hard, overtime, for free, just to make it right. Compassion is not weakness. It is a competitive advantage. It lowers turnover, it increases effort, and it builds a culture that people actually want to work in. Let's move on to something a bit more complex. This is a concept that trips up a lot of young entrepreneurs and newly promoted managers. The paradox of leading by following. There's a Hollywood misconception. We see it in the movies like The Wolf of Wall Street or Glengarry Glen Ross, that the leader must always be at the front. The leader holds the flag. The leader barks the orders. The leader knows every single detail of every single job. That is a fast track to mediocrity. Best leaders, the ones who build empires, not just small businesses, know when to follow. Think about a championship basketball team. The coach is the leader, right? They set the strategy, manage the roster, handle the media. But during the game, with 30 seconds on the clock, who is leading the play? the point guard. A coach knows when to sit down, shut up, and let the point guard run the floor. If the coach tries to micromanage every dribble from the sideline, the team loses flow. The team loses confidence. In business, this translates to hiring people who are smarter than you in their specific field and then getting out of their way. If you hire a marketing expert who has spent 10 years mastering SEO and brand voice, why are you telling them how to write the copy? If you hire a senior developer, why are you hovering over their shoulder telling them how to code? True leadership is realizing, I am the generalist. You are the specialist. You lead the vision, but you follow their expertise. It takes incredible emotional intelligence to suppress your ego and say, I don't know. You tell me. It also means practicing servient leadership. Sometimes leading means getting in the trenches. It means asking your team, how can I help you remove this roadblock? Rather than demanding, why isn't this done? When your team sees that you're willing to follow, that you're willing to listen to their ideas and trust their direction, they stop working for a paycheck and start working for the mission. They take ownership. And here's the magic trick. When your team takes ownership, your business scales. You stop being the bottleneck. You stop being the person who has to make every single decision. It's true freedom in business. Now let's bring it back to you, the individual, because you cannot lead a team. You cannot lead a company if you cannot lead yourself. We talk about controlling personal emotions in high-stake environments. Business is emotional. Don't let anyone tell you it's just business. That's a lie. It's your life. It's your money. It's your reputation. It is the food on your table. Of course it's emotional. You lose a massive client. A project fails after 6 months of work. A partner betrays you. The city denies your permit. It's frustrating. It makes you want to snap. It makes you want to throw the laptop across the room. It makes you want to send that email in all caps with 5 exclamation points. But remember what we talked about in episode 2 regarding triggers. In business, you cannot afford to feed the negativity. Here's the hard truth. The person who loses their temper loses the room. If you blow up in a meeting, you lose authority. You look unstable. If you send that angry email at 11 p.m., you create a permanent paper trail of your lack of control. Leaders with high emotional intelligence feel the anger. They're human. They feel the heat rise in their chests. Their pulse quickens, but they do not act on that feeling. They have discipline to use the pause. It's a 3-second rule. When you hear bad news, when somebody insults you, when a deal falls apart, count to 3. Breathe. They say, I need a moment to process this. Or, let's revisit this tomorrow morning when I have looked at the data. You have to be the thermostat, not the thermometer. Think about the distinction. A thermometer just reflects the temperature of the room. If the room is chaotic and hot, the thermometer goes up. It is a victim of the environment. On the other hand, a thermostat sets the temperature. You walk in calm, cool, and collected, and the room adjusts to you. That's power. That is executive presence. But here's the catch. You cannot maintain that level of self-control, that thermostat energy, if you're running on empty. This brings us to our next point, balancing your personal life to avoid burnout. There's a toxic narrative in entrepreneurship right now, the Grindset, the idea that you have to work 24/7, 365. Sleep when you're dead. While they sleep, I grind. That's false. That is biology denying reality. That is a recipe for bad decision making. Your brain is an organ. It consumes energy. If you run a car engine at 7,000 RPMs for a week straight without stopping, the engine blows. your brain is no different. If your home life is in shambles, your business will eventually suffer. You cannot focus on scaling a company if you're worried about your relationship falling apart or if you haven't seen your kids in a week. Furthermore, you need cognitive distance. You need an outlet. Maybe it's the gym, working that aggression out on the weights. Maybe it's travel, getting away to the beach, changing your environment to reset your perspective. Maybe it's a hobby, something tangible like 3D printing or woodworking or gaming, something that has nothing to do with revenue. Why is this important? Because your brain solves complex problems when you aren't looking at them. It's called the default mode network. It's why you get the best ideas in the shower or on a drive. That balance recharges your emotional battery. When you're happy at home, you're dangerous in business. You have clarity, you have energy, you have patience. Do not sacrifice your personal peace for a profit margin. It's never worth it. It usually leads to lower profits in the long run because you start making mistakes. We've talked about listening. We've talked about compassion. We've talked about leading by following and finding balance. But there's one final piece of the puzzle, the moment of truth, rising to the occasion. No matter how well you prepare, no matter how balanced you are, there will be moments in business where your back is against the wall. The funding falls through the day before payroll. The product launch fails. The market crashes. A lawsuit lands on your desk. This is the crunch. This is where emotional intelligence separates the amateurs from the pros. People with low emotional intelligence panic. The fear sets in. They look for someone to blame. They scream at their team, or they freeze up, paralyzed by the fear of failure. People with high emotional intelligence pivot. Rising to the occasion means suppressing the fear of failure and replacing it with hyper focus on execution. It's that clutch gene. It's having self-awareness to say, okay, this is bad. I'm scared, but I'm capable. It's the resilience. It's looking at a failure not as an admission of who you are, but as data. You say, okay, that didn't work out. What did we learn? How do we move on? What is the next right step? When you're a leader who stays calm when the building is on fire, that is who people want to follow. That is who investors want to back. That is who customers trust. You rise to the occasion, not by being a superhero, but by trusting your preparation, by trusting the balance you've built, and knowing that no matter what happens, you have the emotional regulation to handle the outcome. So we've covered a lot of ground today. We've moved from the silence of listening to the noise of the crunch. Here's your homework for this week. I don't want you to just listen to this podcast, nod your head, and go back to your old habits. I want you to act. I want you to pick up one of these pillars to focus on for the next 5 days. Maybe you need to practice listening in your next meeting. I want you to physically stop yourself from interrupting. Wait 3 seconds after the other person stops talking before you speak and see what happens. Maybe you need to work on control. Catch yourself before you send that snappy Slack message or angry email. Save it as a draft, read it tomorrow. Or maybe you need balance. Maybe the bravest business decision you can make today is to close the laptop at 6 p.m., turn off your phone notifications, and go have dinner with your family. Business isn't just about the bottom line. It's about the mindset behind the bottom line. If you build your emotional intelligence, you don't just build a company, you build a legacy. You build a life that you actually enjoy living. This has been the Mindset Manual. I'm Myron Williams. Thank you for lending me your ears and your time. Please subscribe to my channel and turn on your notifications to receive updates on new episodes. Remember to protect your peace Find your balance and keep that engine running smooth. I'll see you next time.
The Mindset Manual with Myron Williams.